My name's Jonathan. I'm married to Janice. Janice was diagnosed with a mouth cancer. It was a shock. We were not expecting it. I wasn't expecting it. And I think for the first couple of days after we left the school and we talked about it, it was just a shock. That was simply the way that I felt about it. When cancer gets mentioned, you do worry. So once the shock eventually passed, it was then worrying about the next stages that we were going to go through. You cannot underestimate the shock whenever somebody mentions the C word in a diagnosis. And I think that whenever Janice and I spoke about it, whenever we both of us actually came to terms with what was actually happening and the journey that Janice was going to have to go through, I think once I reconciled that, I was fine. I think that I'm a firm believer in that there's certain things we can control. There's things that we can't control that are totally out of our control. So I accept that if I can control something, then I can work with that. If I can't control it, I try to forget about it and let other people who can control that look after it for me, if that makes sense. It's probably a very convoluted way of saying that I was fine whenever Janice and I both understood the journey that she was going on. I was fine with that because I was confident that we had the right people and the right resources at our beck and call who would support us and would take us along that journey. It was then decided that obviously Janice was going to have an operation, which was going to be a fairly serious and a serious operation lasting about 11 or 12 hours, which in itself is a worry because of the length of time that you're going to be on the operating table. Janice was then in the Ulster Hospital for probably about 10 days. That was scary from my perspective. Obviously I wasn't with Janice the day that she had the operation and didn't get a chance to speak to her or to see her until the following day. And then the visits that I had to the hospital were difficult. They were difficult because you've got someone that you love lying there, not able to talk to you because she had a tracheostomy as well. And we were conversing by basically a notepad for the first 2 or 3 days. But then very quickly you just accept that the operation was deemed to be successful. Although that being said, they still need to do a biopsy on the cancerous cells that were taken from Janice's cheek to make sure that there was no further medical procedures that needed to take place. And then that was very quickly after that, Janice was up, she was moving. We took walks up and down the ward, accompanied by a moving drip, which was very interesting. And very quickly we realised that the operation had been successful. Janice hadn't changed. She may look a wee bit different, but all in all, it was just a relief then to have her and to have her, inverted commas, well again. Although there was obviously a longer journey to actually take place before you could actually say that. Whenever she was out of hospital, then we did attend the physio. Obviously, with a mouth or an oral cancer, there is a lot of swelling. And I must admit that the physiotherapist that we went to in Bangor Hospital was exceptional. She was able to talk to Janice, put her mind at rest about certain things, but obviously then started working on on trying to decrease the swelling as quickly as possible. We were fortunate. Whenever the biopsy came back from the lymph nodes and from the cancerous cells that were taken from her cheek, it hadn't spread. So there was no requirement for either chemo or radiotherapy, which was a massive relief to not just me, but obviously to Janice and to the family. I'm not the best cook. I'm not the best house husband that you would ever come across. So I relied extensively on friends and family who actually cooked for Janice and cooked to the type of meal that you'd be able to eat, which was obviously very soft food with plenty of sauces to give it a bit of flavour and a certain amount of texture. That was invaluable to me. It was my daughter, my friends, my sister-in-law, all contributed to help Janice, and I couldn't have done without that. From my perspective, I think Janice is a nurse, so she was able to look after herself to a certain degree from pain management. She was able to take her own medication. I feel that I was able to help from an emotional support perspective. Obviously, I'm not the one that went through the operation, from that perspective. I'm not the one that had the challenges from swelling and from the scarring. So I tried as best I could to be as strong for Janice as possible and to support from an emotional perspective. From my perspective, I think that the strongest person helping me was Janice herself. I think Janice didn't want me being in a situation where I got overly stressed or was emotionally struggling as far as it was concerned. And I think we have that type of relationship where we tend to bounce off each other. Even though she tells me what to do an awful lot of the time, we still have that type of relationship where we can talk about things. The emotional support, I think it does come naturally in a certain way. I mean, again, I'll say it again, that it's someone you love, it's someone that you don't want to see in any pain, whether that be physical or emotional pain. So you just try to understand that if you do the right things, so if you understand and listen to what the healthcare professionals are actually saying to you, and trust what they say to you, then that will take you an awful long way along the road to recovery. It's whenever you try to do things off your own bat that you are maybe going to go awry. There were occasions within the first couple of months where we turned down invitations to go out for meals. We camp a lot, and we basically had to postpone a couple of camping trips that we had already planned with friends because it just wasn't compatible with the way Janice was feeling and the way she was trying to recover from obviously what was a serious operation. We did very quickly as a couple, probably within 4 or 5 weeks of the surgery, we took a week in a caravan in Ballycastle, just really to get away from things, to get into a situation where Janice would be just away from all the trials and tribulations of what she'd gone through to a certain extent. And that worked very well for us. We got some downtime. Janice very quickly accepted the scarring that came with the operation. The swelling was there, but that didn't stop us. I mean, we were able to go out socially. We were able to go out with friends. We did a lot of walking. We would have been out and just gone, taking coffee cups and gone for a walk, or even just sit in the car. And so going out wasn't an issue. From a visual perspective and from an understanding how the swelling and the scarring affected us. From my perspective, I didn't see it after a couple of days. It just wasn't on the radar. Janice did wear a scarf maybe on a couple of occasions whenever we went out together, which was basically to try and hide the scarring. but then accepted very quickly that, listen, this is who she is. The operation took place in June, so we then came into the summer, and it's not very practical to wear scarves during the summer. So very quickly, we accepted that the scarring was there. Probably the swelling obviously lasted longer, and obviously it was probably the biggest challenge from Janice's perspective. Although from my perspective, it was, I was just glad that she'd gone through the operation. It had been a success. There was no additional medical treatment that was actually required at that stage. So I was quite accepting of it. Our family, our daughter and our son, stepped up to the mark. One of the regrets that we had whenever Janice was first diagnosed is that we kept the diagnosis to ourselves for probably about 10 days. We didn't share it with anybody, didn't share it with friends, didn't share it with family. And in hindsight, you need your friends and your family. And we feel that we maybe should have been a bit more open with them at the time. I think we were just kind of maybe not burying our heads in the sand a wee bit, but we were just kind of wanting to understand it from our own perspective without involving others. And one of the regrets we have is that our daughter, who has been immense to Janice, was the last person we told, because we assumed that she wouldn't necessarily be strong enough, in inverted commas, to actually get that news that mum has cancer. Whereas it was the exact opposite, that she was, she was a rock, and that she was somebody that Janice relied on whenever we were going through our experience. Once Janice was diagnosed with the cancer, you hear stories about the National Health Service. And it depends whether you believe them or not. But I was amazed at the way a system was put in place that supported Janice from day one through to well after the operation took place. One of the challenges that we did face was that within 6 months of the operation, the COVID pandemic had basically hit. And one of the things that Janice was always crying out for, to a certain extent, and I would have supported that, was the need to see somebody, to actually have them to look at the internal scarring that had taken place. And I think that was difficult because COVID hit. We ended up having conversations, and it was a bit of a challenge. I never felt the need to reach out to them, but I did know that they were there if I'd needed to. And I know that you do feel that you have a relationship with the consultant and with the healthcare professionals that looked after you. And I can honestly say that if I met them in the street, I think the first thing I'd do is give them a hug, because they were fantastic. Okay, so you obviously meet an awful lot of healthcare professionals, through your journey. One of, if not the key person that we met, was the nursing specialist, who, from the very first time we were talking about the operation and the stages that Janice would have to go through, was an immense support to us. And that just followed all the way through. So even after Janice had the operation and we were in the Ulster Hospital, sitting in the ward, the nursing specialist was fantastic. And I can't talk highly enough of the various specialists and the nursing staff as a whole. My own mental health, I think it's maybe something I never really thought about. I didn't really give it an awful lot of thought. I think I just went with the flow, and was quite happy that as long as Janice was okay, my understanding would be that I would be okay. But I don't think my own mental health was something that I gave an awful lot of thought too, if that makes sense. I think that the offer of counselling would have been more necessary for me if Janice had been in a situation where we then had to go through chemotherapy or radiotherapy, and everything would have been, everything would have been much more scary, much more frightening. I think that because the cancer was actually identified and, inverted commas, caught very early, without Janice needing additional treatment, then I think that I was comfortable with that. If it had have been, extended and it had have dragged on and there was a need for radiotherapy or chemotherapy, I think that counselling would have been definitely something that I would have availed of. I mean, you're faced with the potential of losing your partner, because you don't know what the outcome's going to be. There were times that we were lying in bed in the morning and Janice would be in tears because she didn't know what the steps that she was going to have to go through. And not so much the steps, we knew that there was an operation, but you don't know what the outcome's going to be. And that's very hard. That's very hard to listen to. And there's only so many times you can actually say, listen, don't worry, it'll be all right. People will be looking after you. You can only say that so often. And I think, maybe it's a question Janice could answer, but from my perspective, I think it's, during that period of time, we definitely did become closer, more accepting of what we have together, or more, maybe not accepting is not the right word, but more aware of what we maybe mean to each other and what, what life ahead we have that we didn't want to go, no, we're just going to wallow in this, and that wasn't necessarily the right attitude to have. So probably there's two pieces of advice I'd like to share. Everybody's going to be different and everybody's going to have their own take on what they're going through. But from my perspective, once you get over the initial shock of the diagnosis, I think there has to be an accepting or an acceptance that because you don't like the diagnosis, that doesn't mean to say it's going to go away. So you're in a position where you've been diagnosed with a cancer. What are you going to do about it? And what you're going to do about it is that you're going to accept that that's there and do everything in your power to make life for your partner as enjoyable or as bearable as possible until you go through the stages of the operation and the healthcare professionals looking after you. But probably most importantly is listening and doing what the healthcare professionals tell you to do, because they are the experts. They know what you're going through and they know what you need to do to be for the operation and for the recovery to be a success. So I would say just listen to them, put all your faith with those individuals, because they will help and they're the only people that can really help you. So in summary, accept where you are, but then accept the help that you're going to get from the healthcare professionals and also your family and friends, because you can't do it on your own.